Ancient cities were deliberate masterpieces, not accidental gatherings. This is the reality crafted by the planners of early empires, where avenues tracked the stars and aqueducts conquered mountains. The great urban historian Lewis observed that a city is a fact in nature, but it is also a conscious work of art. This video will decode the sophisticated language of stone and space used by these civilizations, teaching you how to read the hidden messages in every street grid and temple alignment. Why does the perfect geometry of a city built 4,000 years ago still baffle modern engineers? How could a network of roads hold an empire together for centuries? We are going to answer these questions by uncovering the principles that turned ambition into enduring stone. By the end, you will see the modern world around you with entirely new eyes, understanding the ancient roots of power and place that shape our lives today. What do you believe is the most important lesson a city can teach us about the people who built it? That initial sketch in the sand was more than a map. It was a declaration, a statement of intent carved into the very earth, announcing that from this point forward, human settlement would no longer be left to chance. This is the birth of what we call imperial urban planning. It is the conscious, large-scale organization of space, and it became the signature of every major early empire, from the river valleys of Mesopotamia to the highlands of the Andes. Before empires, villages grew organically. Paths became streets because they were walked often. Homes clustered around a central well or a protective hill, but an empire requires a different kind of order. Its core objective is not just to house people, but to manifest control, to facilitate the smooth machinery of administration, and to project ideological power into stone and avenue. The city itself becomes the ultimate tool of governance. As the archaeologist Trigger observed, the first cities were the physical expressions of a new social order. They were not simply larger villages. They were something entirely new. Think of it as the difference between a melody that emerges from a group of musicians jamming and a symphony composed by a single conductor, with every note, every instrument, every pause meticulously placed to create a specific, overwhelming effect. The imperial city is that symphony. It tells the citizen where they belong. It channels the movement of soldiers, tax collectors, and grain. And its grandest structures, always visible, remind everyone of the source of all power and order. This shift from organic settlement to designed capital is our starting point. To understand the specific systems these planners built, we must first grasp this foundational blueprint of intention. The grammar of power, written not on parchment, but in the very layout of the world. Walk the avenue of the dead in on the morning of a solstice, and you are not just moving through a city. You are walking through a calendar. The immense pyramid of the sun does not merely cast a shadow. It projects a line of perfect, creeping darkness that aligns with the central axis of the avenue on that one specific day, a phenomenon that could not be accidental. This is the first and most profound principle of imperial urban planning, the sacred geometry of power. Before a single stone was, or a foundation dug, these master planners began with an invisible blueprint drawn from the heavens. Their cities were terrestrial maps of the cosmos itself, designed to harmonize human life with the perceived order of the universe. The ruler was not just a political leader. He was the mediator between earth and sky, and his capital city was the physical proof of that sacred contract. This is why the street grid of Mohenjo-Daro, one of the world's earliest planned cities, was so meticulously aligned to the cardinal directions north, south, east, and west. It imposed a human sense of order that mirrored the eternal paths of the sun and stars. Centuries later, the Abbasid Caliph Al would commission the round city of Baghdad, a perfect circle with concentric rings of walls and avenues radiating from the central palace and mosque like the rays of the sun. To live within that geometry was to live inside a symbol of divine centrality and imperial reach. The tools for this were not just spiritual, but remarkably precise. Archaeologists find evidence of standardized measurement units, like the Indus Valley cubit or the Roman piece, used with relentless consistency. Major temples and palaces were placed using sacred ratios, numbers believed to hold cosmic significance, ensuring their proportions resonated with a deeper harmony. This geometric code was a silent, omnipresent language of legitimacy. It told every citizen, from the highest priest to the lowliest merchant, that their society was not a random collection of people, but a deliberate reflection of universal law. The straight street, the aligned gateway, the pyramid's perfect slope, these were constant, quiet reminders that the ruler's authority was as natural and inevitable as the sunrise. It built awe into the very pavement beneath your feet. But while the geometry spoke of celestial harmony, the city also had to manage the very earthly, very messy realities of daily life and imperial control. How do you turn that sacred blueprint into a functioning machine for 1 million people, yet that celestial harmony required a very earthly foundation? Water was the true lifeblood of any empire, and its mastery became the second great principle of urban planning. Think of the silent, steady flow through a Roman aqueduct, a gravity-powered marvel that could span valleys and bring fresh mountain springs directly into a city's heart, turning arid landscapes into fertile breadbaskets for 1 million people. This was not mere convenience. It was the empire's circulatory system. To control water was to control life itself, dictating food supply, population health, and the very location of cities. The historian famously theorized that these massive, coordinated water projects gave rise to what he called hydraulic societies, where centralized authority was necessary to organize the vast labor required to build and maintain dams, canals, and aqueducts. This centralized control, he argued, inevitably led to powerful, bureaucratic states. While later scholars have critiqued this as being too deterministic, the core insight remains powerful. The scale of these water systems was a direct reflection of imperial power. Consider the qanats of the Persian Empire, an astonishing network of gently sloping underground tunnels that tapped into mountain aquifers dozens of miles away. These hidden channels delivered water to the surface without a single drop lost to evaporation in the desert sun, creating oases and sustaining cities like a secret, life-giving vein. Or look to Southeast Asia, where the Khmer Empire engineered Angkor into a hydrological masterpiece. Their vast reservoir, the West, is still visible from space, and an intricate grid of canals and moats did more than prevent flooding. They managed water for rice agriculture with such precision that they could support an urban population density that would not be seen again in the region for centuries. The technical prowess here is staggering, but the real genius was organizational. Mobilizing thousands of workers, planning for seasonal changes, and allocating this precious resource fairly or strategically required a bureaucratic machine of immense sophistication. A failed aqueduct or a silted-up canal could mean famine, unrest, and the weakening of imperial grip. Thus, the flow of water mirrored the flow of imperial command. It was a silent, constant demonstration that the state could provide the most fundamental element of survival, building loyalty through literal sustenance. And just as these planners channeled water with meticulous intent, they would apply the same precise engineering to the most dynamic element of all, the movement of people themselves. A merchant arriving in the great Tang capital of N did not need to ask for directions. The city itself told him exactly where to go. Its vast, perfectly rectangular grid of streets, enclosed by towering walls, divided the metropolis into over 110 walled wards, each a miniature city within a city. Markets operated only in the 2 designated eastern and western market wards, their gates locked at night. Administrative bureaus occupied specific blocks along the central, Imperial Avenue. This was the third, and perhaps most psychologically powerful, principle of imperial planning, the use of the grid and spatial hierarchy to organize not just movement, but society itself. The straight lines of a gridiron street plan, seen from the Indus Valley to Hellenistic cities to the Roman world, presented an illusion of perfect equality. Every block looked the same from above. But on the ground, This geometric order was the ultimate tool for social control and segregation. It made the abstract pyramid of imperial hierarchy tangible, visible, and inescapable. Take the Roman insula. These were not just city blocks, but multi-story apartment buildings that housed the common people. They were often crowded, with shops on the ground floor and residences stacked above, facing inward to a central courtyard. Meanwhile, the wealthy lived in spacious, single-family villas, often located on the quieter, more prestigious hills. The grid organized this separation with brutal efficiency. In the Aztec capital, the city was divided into 4 great or quarters, which were further subdivided into, or neighborhood wards, each with its own temple, school, and assigned trade. You determined your trade, your social obligations, and your place in the cosmic order. You were born into a spatial category as much as a social one. This was the genius of the imperial grid. It rendered the complex machinery of state administration simple. Tax collectors knew exactly which ward to visit for potters or weavers. Soldiers could be mobilized quickly along the straight, wide central avenues, designed less for daily traffic and more for military parades and imperial processions that showcased power. The grid made rebellion logistically difficult, as barricading the organic, winding lanes of an older city was impossible here. But most of all, it made social status permanent and visible. You did not need a law to tell you your place. The width of your street, the size of your living space, the distance from the central palace or temple complex, all of it communicated your rank in a silent, daily language of stone. The city plan was a constant, quiet lesson in knowing your place. This rigid internal order, however, created a world worth protecting, a concentration of wealth and power that demanded an equally formidable system of defense, turning the city itself into a fortress. The walls were not just stone. They were a psychological landscape. Rising from the Anatolian plain, their sloping glacis made scaling them a near impossibility, a silent declaration that the Hittite king's power was as unassailable as the bedrock itself. This leads us to the 4th foundational principle of imperial urban planning: fortification and defensibility. In an age of constant threat, a city's walls were its ultimate argument for existence. They were a complex fusion of military engineering and political theater, serving the dual purpose of keeping enemies out while projecting an image of sovereign permanence to those within. As the military historian John framed it, the design of a fortress is the architecture of conflict, a physical manifestation of strategic thought. Every element, from the thickness of the curtain wall to the angle of a tower's arrow slits, was a calculated response to the weapons and tactics of the era. The legendary walls of Constantinople present the ultimate evolution of this idea. They were not a single line, but a layered system, a deep defensive zone comprising a wide moat, an outer wall, and then the massive, towering inner walls. This design forced any attacker to endure a killing field, breaching one barrier only to face another, even stronger one, all while under constant fire from above. It turned the city's perimeter into a multi-stage trap, and it kept the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire secure for nearly 1,000 years. But defensibility began long before the first siege. It started with location. Assyrian planners consistently placed their royal citadels, like those at Nineveh, or on raised artificial mounds or natural high ground. This served a practical military purpose, granting defenders a commanding view of the surrounding terrain. Yet it also served a profound symbolic function, placing the seat of power literally above the common city, a visual metaphor of the ruler's elevated, protected status. The city's very shape could be a weapon. The perfectly circular plan of Baghdad, while cosmic in symbolism, also had a defensive logic, eliminating weak corner points where siege engines could concentrate their force. Gateways, the necessary breaches in the wall, became the most heavily fortified points of all, often designed as labyrinthine complexes with multiple doors, murder holes, and courtyards where invading forces could be contained and eliminated. These walls did more than keep danger out. They defined reality. Inside was order, law, and the emperor's peace. Outside was the untamed wilderness, the realm of chaos and the unknown. The wall was the definitive line between civilization and everything else, a boundary that required constant vigilance. This vigilance, this need to monitor and control the flow of everything from people to ideas, would give rise to the most subtle and pervasive system of all, one that operated not through stone, but through observation and information. That psychological landscape of the wall created a stage, and every empire needed a star performer. This brings us to the fifth and most visually spectacular principle, the monumental core, architecture as permanent propaganda. The city's heart was not just an administrative center. It was a carefully scripted theater of power, designed to overwhelm the senses and imprint a single, unforgettable message of supremacy onto every visitor. Think of the Babylonian processional way, a paved corridor of cosmic blue glazed brick leading directly to the towering Ishtar Gate. Lining this sacred path were over 120 majestic lions molded from that same brilliant brick, their stylized forms a relentless parade of royal and divine strength. For any foreign dignitary, merchant, or conquered subject walking that road, the message was inescapable. You are entering the domain of King Nebuchadnezzar II, a ruler whose glory is as permanent and dazzling as these fired tiles. This was not decoration. It was psychological engineering at an imperial scale. The strategic placement of these monuments followed a precise logic. They anchored the city's sacred axes, the same ones aligned with the stars, transforming abstract celestial harmony into tangible, breathtaking stone. The Acropolis in Athens, rising sheer from the plain, was not merely a collection of temples. It was the city's crown, visible from miles away, a gleaming marble testament to Athenian wealth, devotion to Athena, and cultural preeminence. Every sculpture on the Parthenon's pediments, every metope depicting mythical victories, told a story of divine favor and civic triumph. In Rome, the Forum began as a simple market and gathering place, but under the emperors, it became a densely packed narrative of consecutive power. Triumphal arches, like that of Titus, commemorated specific military victories, allowing the populace to literally walk through the emperor's success. The Curia housed the Senate, the basilicas administered law and commerce, and towering over it all were temples to emperors and state gods. This architectural program created a daily itinerary of loyalty. To move through the Forum was to be surrounded by the history, law, and divine sanction of Rome itself. The materials themselves shouted the empire's reach. The Romans used imported marble from across the Mediterranean, Egyptian granite, and rare porphyry, their very colors and textures a map of conquest. The scale was deliberately inhuman, forcing the individual to feel small and the state to feel eternal. The Pyramid of the Sun at, a mountain built by human hands, achieved the same effect through sheer mass. You cannot look at it without feeling the weight of the authority that commanded its construction. These structures served a dual audience. For the elite, they reinforced their privileged place within this glorious system. For the common citizen, they offered a share in this reflected glory, a reason for pride and passive allegiance. But this theater of stone required an audience. It needed a thriving, functioning populace to witness its grandeur, to fill its plazas during festivals, and to generate the taxes that paid for it all. This monumental propaganda only worked if the city behind it hummed with life, which leads us to the final, most pragmatic system of all, the invisible machinery that fed, clothed, and sustained the empire's beating heart. The marble lions of Babylon watched a constant flow of traffic, but the true reach of an empire extended far beyond its grand gates. A single, urgent message from a frontier governor had to cross mountains and rivers, reaching the emperor's desk in a matter of weeks, not months. This demand gave rise to the sixth and most expansive principle of imperial planning, the infrastructure network, the vital veins of commerce and control that stitched a sprawling territory into a single, manageable domain. While the monumental core awed the citizen, these networks empowered the state itself, moving the essential elements of power, people, information, and goods with a speed that was previously unimaginable. The most famous of these systems is, of course, the Roman road network. But its genius was not merely in the engineering of the paved surface, impressive as that was. It was in the system built upon it. The Imperial Postal and Transportation Service operated like a state-run relay race. Couriers on horseback or in light carriages could change mounts at official stations spaced a day's journey apart, allowing a message to travel up to 50 Roman miles, about 46 modern miles, in a single day. This transformed information from a sluggish trickle into a rapid current, enabling the emperor in Rome to make decisions about Britain or Egypt based on intelligence that was merely weeks old. The roads themselves, famously straight and built to last, were monuments to Roman pragmatism and permanence, declaring that wherever the road led, Roman law and order followed. This concept of shrinking geography through infrastructure was mastered much earlier by the Achaemenid Persians. Their royal road, stretching over 1,600 miles from Susa to Sardis, was patrolled and maintained to such a standard that royal inspectors could traverse its entire length in just 7 days, a journey that would have taken 90 on foot. Alongside it operated a postal system so efficient that the Greek historian Herodotus marveled at its reliability, writing that neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night stayed these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds, a testament to imperial discipline that echoes even today. But networks were not only for land. The Grand Canal of China, whose construction spanned dynasties, created an artificial river highway over 1,100 miles long. By linking the fertile Yangtze River basin to the political centers in the arid north, it solved the most fundamental problem of governing a vast empire, the reliable movement of food. The canal allowed the Sui and Tang dynasties to feed their massive capitals and garrison their northern armies with rice from the south, turning geographical disparity into an administrative strength. The purpose of these networks was always twofold: economic and military. Smooth, paved roads meant merchants could transport goods more cheaply and safely, stimulating trade and filling imperial coffers with taxes. Those same roads allowed legions to march rapidly to a rebellion or a threatened border. A well-dredged canal moved grain barges, but it could also move troop transports. This infrastructure created a feedback loop of control. To build it required a centralized authority with immense resources and organizational skill. Once built, it reinforced that central authority by making the state more responsive, more present, and more capable of extracting what it needed from every corner of the realm. The empire could now feel its own pulse, taking censuses, collecting taxes, and deploying soldiers with a new efficiency. It turned a collection of distant provinces into an interconnected organism. And if the roads and canals were the empire's circulatory system, then the logic that governed the flow within its very cities was a microcosm of this same controlling intelligence, a precise blueprint for daily life that determined where you could live, work, and trade. Mohenjo-Daro presents a profound enigma. Here, on the fertile plains of the Indus River, a city thrived for centuries with a logic so modern it feels out of place in the ancient world. While the empires we often celebrate built towering pyramids and gilded palaces to glorify individual rulers, the planners of Mohenjo-Daro invested their genius in something else entirely: the quiet, dignified infrastructure of public health. This city, whose name even means mound of the dead men, reveals a civilization obsessed not with the afterlife of kings, but with the daily life of its citizens. Its grandeur is found not in a central temple, but in a network of covered drains running beneath its streets. Archaeologists uncovering the site were stunned by the sheer rationality of its design. The entire city was built on a massive mud brick platform to protect it from seasonal floods, a foundational act of collective foresight. From this base rose a strict grid of wide main streets, intersecting at perfect right angles to create uniform city blocks. Within these blocks, A warren of narrower lanes provided access to the standardized, inward-facing homes, many featuring courtyards and staircases leading to upper floors. But the true marvel is hidden below. Almost every house had its own bathing area with a watertight floor, and wastewater was channeled into a citywide system of brick-lined drains that ran beneath the streets, covered with stone slabs for easy maintenance. These drains emptied into larger sewers on the outskirts, a sanitation system of a sophistication that would not be seen again in many parts of the world for over 3,000 years. Water came from an equally impressive source, hundreds of public and private wells, constructed with precise, tapered bricks to maintain their structural integrity. This was a society that standardized the very building blocks of its world. Bricks, whether used for a grand structure or a modest home, were produced in just a few uniform ratios, their dimensions consistent across the entire Indus Valley, suggesting a centralized authority with incredible quality control. So what does this mean? The absence of colossal statues of kings or vast royal tombs is deafening. It suggests a social structure where authority might have been more corporate or communal, vested in a class of administrators or priests who derived their power from ensuring collective well-being rather than personal glorification. The city itself was the monument, a testament to order, cleanliness, and egalitarian access to fundamental amenities. It challenges our deep-seated assumption that early states must always be dominated by a single, godlike ruler whose ego is stamped on the landscape. Here, the state's face was a well, its voice the gentle flow of water through a clean drain. This raises a haunting question. If their power was so effectively woven into the fabric of daily survival, why did this impeccable civilization eventually fade from history? Their silence leaves us with a powerful counterpoint, a model of urban planning that speaks of a different kind of intelligence. To understand the full spectrum of imperial logic, we must now turn from this society of hidden engineers to one that made its ambitions utterly, terrifyingly visible. The silent, rational order of Mohenjo-Daro stands in stark contrast to a city that shouted its presence to the world. Far to the west, another empire perfected a different kind of urban language, one designed not just for living, but for replication. Walk the main east-west street of a Roman colony in modern-day Algeria, and you are not in a unique provincial town. You are walking through a perfect Roman blueprint stamped onto the North African landscape. Founded under Emperor Trajan around the year 100, was a retirement settlement for veteran soldiers, and its plan is a textbook example of Roman planning ideology. A precise grid of streets, laid out with a surveyor's, creates uniform blocks called insulae. At the intersection of the two main avenues sits the forum, the political and social heart. Nearby, a theater, public baths, and eventually a library would complete the civic package. This was not a one-off design. It was a standardized urban template, a kit of parts that Rome exported from the mists of Britain to the deserts of Syria. Wherever the legions marched and secured a territory, this model city followed, serving as the ultimate tool of colonization, Romanization, and administrative control. The historian A. captured its essence perfectly, noting that Roman architecture is the architecture of the engineer. This was planning as a systematic, repeatable engineering solution to the problem of empire. The core of this template was the Forum Basilica complex. The Forum was an open plaza, a public living room for commerce, politics, and socializing. Facing it was the Basilica, a large, rectangular hall with a central nave and side aisles. This was not a temple, but a multi-purpose civic building housing law courts, government offices, and merchant exchanges. Its design was so effective for gathering people under one roof that it would later be adopted by early Christians for their churches. Then came the amenities, the tools of Romanization. The public baths, or thermae, were not merely for washing. They were sprawling leisure complexes with hot and cold rooms, swimming pools, libraries, and gardens, open to all citizens for a minimal fee. To spend an afternoon at the baths was to participate in Roman culture, to adopt Roman customs of leisure and the naked social equality of the amphitheater, like the Colosseum in Rome or the one in Verona, provided the thrilling, and sometimes difficult, spectacle of games, reinforcing shared civic identity and the power of the state that provided the entertainment. And underpinning it all was the aqueduct, that sine qua of Roman urban life, delivering the vast quantities of water needed for the baths, the fountains, and the drinking needs of a large population. This replicable model created a powerful psychological effect. A retired legionary from Gaul, resettled in Algeria, or a local merchant in Anatolia would find a familiar urban environment. They would know how to navigate the grid, where to conduct business in the basilica, how to relax in the baths. This familiarity bred a sense of belonging to something larger than one's native tribe or region. It created a portable Roman identity. The city itself was the teacher, instructing diverse peoples in what it meant to be Roman through daily routine and architectural experience. This systematic export of urban form was a unifying force of incredible power, making the vast empire feel coherent and managed. It is a concept that finds a startling, yet profoundly different, parallel an ocean away, where another civilization built cities not as engineering templates, but as direct maps of the cosmos itself, is a question written in stone. As the first light of the spring equinox crests the horizon, it does not simply rise, it performs. The sun aligns perfectly with the peak of the Pyramid of the Sun, its rays shooting down the city's central spine, the Street of the Dead, in a blaze of celestial theater. This was no accident of architecture. Every avenue, every temple platform, every staggering pyramid in this vast metropolis was positioned according to a cosmic blueprint. Built by a people whose name and language are lost to time, is perhaps the expression of urban planning as a sacred act, a city designed not for a king, but for the gods themselves. Its three monumental structures, the pyramids of the sun and moon and the temple of the feathered serpent, are not arranged for aesthetic symmetry. Instead, they mirror the three most sacred mountains visible from the valley, translating a natural, divine landscape into an artificial one under human stewardship. The entire city is oriented 15.5 degrees east of true north, an alignment that precisely tracks the sun's path on key dates in the agricultural and ceremonial calendar. To walk its streets was to move through a functioning model of the universe, where human time and celestial time were locked in permanent harmony. This profound cosmological focus presents a striking mystery, the conspicuous absence of a central palace or obvious royal tomb. While later cities would prominently feature the palaces of known rulers, offers no such clear seat of singular, secular power. Archaeologists have uncovered lavish apartments decorated with murals, but none that scream royal residence. This has led to a compelling theory that the city may have been governed by a collective theocracy, a council of priestly rulers whose authority was derived from their role as mediators of the cosmic order, not from personal lineage or military conquest. Power was diffused, vested in the religious system itself, and the city's overwhelming, repetitive geometry was its manifestation. The state's identity was the sacred alignment, not the face of a king. This ideology of collective order extended to the homes of the common people. The city's estimated 100,000 residents did not live in haphazard neighborhoods. They lived in over 2,000 standardized apartment compounds, walled residential units mass-produced from the same adobe and stone. Each compound housed multiple families around a central courtyard, with shared temples, workshops, and kitchens. This was a planned social order on a granular level, organizing the entire populace into uniform, manageable cells. The murals inside these compounds do not depict conquests or individual glory, but instead show lush gardens, flowing water, and deities, reinforcing the shared spiritual ideology that bound society together. Therefore, stands as a monumental paradox, a city of staggering scale and rigid planning built to serve an anonymous leadership and a collective cosmic vision. It represents a path not taken by many later empires, where the sacred blueprint would gradually be, by the secular stamp of a single emperor's will, a shift we can see with stunning clarity in the planned heart of a later imperial capital. The silent perfection of Axis did not emerge from faith alone. It was born from a tool, a simple device that could translate a priest's celestial vision into a line of stone stretching for miles. Before any empire could build a straight road or align a pyramid, it first had to master the fundamental act of measuring the earth itself. This was the quiet, technical revolution that underpinned all grand urban design, the sophisticated use of surveying and measurement. Picture the Roman, a deceptively simple instrument. A vertical staff held a horizontal crossbeam from which plumb lines were suspended. Planted in fresh soil at the edge of a new territory, a surveyor would sight along these lines to establish a perfect right angle, the first sacred geometry of the grid. With this basic tool, teams could lay out the entire street plan of a city with astonishing precision, turning wilderness into ordered urban space in a matter of months. But the need to measure predated Rome by. In Egypt, the merkhit, a notched palm rib used with a plumb line, was an astronomer's tool. A priest would sight a specific star through the notch, while an assistant marked its transit with the line, allowing them to trace true north-south axes with incredible accuracy for temple and pyramid foundations. This was not guesswork. It was applied celestial mathematics. The Greeks later refined this with a more complex sighting tube mounted on a stand that could measure both horizontal and vertical angles, essentially an early theodolite. It was used for everything from leveling aqueducts to planning siegeworks, demonstrating how the tools of sacred geometry were equally vital for practical engineering. Yet these instruments were useless without a common language of length. Every empire developed and enforced its own standardized units, a silent form of control as powerful as any law. The Roman piece, or foot, was divided into 12 or inches, and was used consistently from Britain to Babylon for military camps, roads, and buildings. Even more remarkably, archaeologists studying the Indus Valley cities found that the bricks, streets, and even the drains were built using a standardized unit now called the Indus inch, approximately 1.32 modern inches. This uniformity across a civilization spanning over 1 million square kilometers implies a central authority capable of disseminating and enforcing technical standards, a breathtaking feat of bureaucratic reach. So how did they achieve such accuracy over vast, uneven landscapes without satellites or laser levels? The answer lies in a combination of simple geometry, relentless repetition, and human chains of communication. To lay a straight road across 50 miles, surveyors would use a series of aligned beacons, hilltop fires by night or smoke by day, creating a visible line across the terrain. Distances were measured by trained pacers, men who could maintain a consistent stride length, or by rolling a calibrated wheel and counting its revolutions. For leveling, they used a Roman tool featuring a long, water-filled trough. When the water was level at both ends, the instrument was perfectly horizontal. The ability to measure and divide land was the ultimate act of possession. It transformed the chaotic, organic earth into a manageable asset. It allowed a central authority to allocate plots to veterans, to calculate taxes based on field area, and to plan the efficient flow of water and goods. This technical mastery was a silent prerequisite for every grand avenue and towering monument we have marveled at. It was the moment abstract imperial ambition learned to count, and in doing so, learned to build a world in its own precise image. That meticulous grid did more than organize streets. It categorized life itself. Within those uniform city blocks, a hidden economic logic was at work, a system of zoning and land use that turned the city into a finely tuned engine of production and control. Walk from the residential deme of ancient Athens, with its quiet family homes, into the roaring, crowded agora, and you cross an invisible but powerful boundary. One space was for private life, the other for public commerce, debate, and ceremony. This intentional separation was of urban planning, designed to optimize every function of the imperial machine. Early planners understood that mixing everything together created chaos and conflict. A royal palace next to a smoky blacksmith's forge was impractical. A sprawling market clogging the main military artery was a strategic hazard, so they began to designate to zone. In the Abbasid city of Merv, along the Silk Road, entire districts were dedicated to single crafts. You would find the street of the potters, the quarter of the metalworkers, the alley of the rug merchants. This clustering, or insulae of industry, served multiple purposes. It concentrated expertise, creating hubs of innovation where techniques could be shared and refined. The supply chain, as all necessary materials could be delivered to one district. And crucially for the state, it made regulation and tax collection breathtakingly efficient. A single imperial inspector could visit the dyer's quarter, assess the season's production of precious purple dye, and calculate the owed levy in an afternoon. The placement of these zones was never accidental. Industries with noxious byproducts, like tanning or pottery kilns, were consistently situated on the city's downwind edge, a pragmatic early form of environmental and public health policy. Administrative and religious precincts, by contrast, occupied the most defensible and symbolically central ground, often on an acropolis or within an inner citadel, physically elevated above the commercial fray. This spatial hierarchy made the structure of power visible and permanent. Your address was a direct indicator of your social and economic status. In imperial Rome, the wealthy patricians lived on the prestigious hills, the Palatine, and in spacious villas with interior gardens. The vast majority, the plebeians, lived in the crowded, multi-story insulae of the low-lying district, above ground-floor shops and taverns. You were quite literally placed in your station. Markets were the most carefully regulated zones of all. They were not free-for-alls, but state-sanctioned theaters of exchange. In the Tang capital of N, commerce was permitted only within the two enormous, walled east and west markets, their gates locked at a curfew drum each night. This control served several imperial goals. It prevented the spontaneous, untaxed trade that could occur in residential alleys. It allowed for quality and price controls to be enforced by market supervisors. And it concentrated wealth and luxury goods in a monitored location, making them easier to tax and, if necessary, confiscate. The famed Fora of Rome began as general markets but evolved into specialized hubs, the Forum for cattle, the Forum for vegetables, each a cog in the city's vast logistical wheel. This planned economic geography was the ultimate expression of imperial priorities. It streamlined production, minimized social friction, and most importantly, it channeled the flow of wealth. Goods moved from specialized production districts to controlled markets, where taxes were extracted, and then the surplus flowed uphill, both literally and metaphorically, to the administrative and elite residential quarters. The city's layout was a map of extraction, ensuring that the economic vitality of the periphery consistently nourished the political core. But this rigid, functional order, for all its efficiency, could feel cold, a machine for living rather than a place for belief. To make citizens accept their designated place within this machine, empires needed to weave a more compelling story, one that connected the daily grind of the market to the eternal order of the cosmos. The wide, colonnaded streets of a Hellenistic city like Ephesus were designed for something beyond mere movement. They were stages for social performance, where citizens could see and be seen, where philosophers taught in the shade of stoas, and merchants displayed goods from across the Mediterranean. This open, outward-facing design encouraged a certain kind of civic life, one built on public interaction, debate, and shared spectacle. Contrast this with the inward-facing residential compounds of Harappa. There, life turned inward toward a central courtyard, a private world for family and craft. Social bonds were forged in the intimacy of shared wells and neighborhood drains, creating tight-knit communities largely hidden from the main thoroughfares. These two models represent a fundamental choice in urban planning, one that actively shaped the rhythm of daily existence and the very definition of community. The design of your city told you how to live. In Rome, the daily ritual of the baths was not optional hygiene, it was a social obligation. The public thermae were the great equalizers, where senators, soldiers, and shopkeepers mingled in the steam, conducting business and gossip in a state of enforced, naked informality. This daily immersion in a shared civic space forged a common Roman identity, dissolving, at least for a few hours, the rigid hierarchies enforced elsewhere. Conversely, the absence of such spaces spoke volumes. In a city without a public theater or a spacious forum, leisure and gathering were privatized, happening within the walls of homes or in the compounds of religious groups, which could reinforce familial or sectarian bonds over a broader civic one. The planners understood this power implicitly. They knew that by placing a granary at one end of the city and the only reliable well at the other, they were not just solving logistical problems, they were scripting a daily commute. The woman who spent hours each day walking to fetch water had a fundamentally different experience of the city than the elite whose villa had a private cistern. Her health, her time for other work, her children's safety on the journey, all were conditioned by that single planning decision. Distance was a form of silent taxation, paid in time and energy by the less fortunate. This spatial engineering extended to the very air you breathed. In cities with strict zoning, a leather tanner lived downwind, his life defined by the odor of his trade, while the perfumer worked in a cleaner, more prestigious district. Your profession dictated your address, and your address dictated your social circle, your marriage prospects, and your family's reputation. The grid, for all its geometric equality, was a masterful tool for maintaining social stratification. It made segregation orderly and permanent. To live in the neatly planned barrack blocks of a Roman legionary fort was to live a life of regimented timing, dictated by the trumpet calls that echoed off the identical stone walls. To live in the sprawling, unplanned shantytowns outside the city walls, the suburbia, was to live in a world of improvisation and far less municipal oversight. Thus, urban planning was the unseen author of countless life stories. It decided who you met, how you worked, where you prayed, and what you aspired to. It was the framework within which social reality was constructed, a constant, quiet lesson in your place within the imperial machine. This machine, however, was not infallible. For all its geometric precision and ideological power, the grandest plans of early empires eventually met their limits, confronting problems of scale, environment, and their own rigid logic that even the most brilliant planners could not forever overcome. The street beneath your feet was never just a path from one place to another. It was a sentence in a story the empire was telling you, a narrative carved in stone and space. To truly decode these ancient cities, we must learn to read their symbolic language, the layer of meaning woven directly into the urban fabric. This is where function meets ideology, where a practical road transforms into a processional way, and a city gate becomes a chapter in a cosmic book. Consider the grand staircase at Persepolis. Foreign dignitaries from across the Achaemenid Empire did not simply enter the audience hall. They ascended a monumental stairway, its walls lined with carved reliefs showing a continuous, orderly parade of representatives from every conquered nation, each bringing their distinctive tribute. The physical act of climbing mirrored the social ascent toward the king, while the carvings narrated a story of universal submission and imperial harmony. You did not just walk to a meeting, you performed your own role in the stone saga of Persian power. This symbolic intent governed the most fundamental elements of the plan. The use of a dominant central line was a masterful tool of psychological direction. In Beijing's Forbidden City, the entire layout forces your gaze and your movement along a single north-south axis, through a series of gates, courtyards, and halls of escalating importance, culminating at the throne of the Son of Heaven. Your journey was a ritual of approach, reinforcing the emperor's remote, central, and elevated status with every step. Even numbers held power. Babylon was famously said to have 8 gates, a number rich with cosmological associations in Mesopotamian belief, linking the city's defenses to celestial order. The very act of passing through one of these named gates, like the Ishtar Gate, was an immersion into a mythic identity. The most profound symbolism was often the most ambitious, the replication of the cosmos on the ground. A city could be a mirror of the heavens. Some scholars interpret the strict grid of Mohenjo-Daro, aligned to the cardinal directions, as an attempt to impose earthly order in harmony with celestial patterns. In later Indian traditions, the mandala, a sacred diagram used for temple and city planning, explicitly divided the site into squares representing different gods and cosmic forces, turning urban design into an act of consecration. The city's foundation myth was not merely a story told, it was a story built. If a culture believed its founder was guided by an eagle to a specific spot, the city's central temple might be placed precisely there, anchoring the community's identity in a sacred geographic memory. Decoding this symbolism reveals the core ideological messages broadcast daily. The straight, unwavering line of a Roman road cutting across the landscape was a symbol of Rome's relentless, rational order conquering nature's chaos. The perfect geometry of a city grid spoke of an eternal, unchanging system. The towering ziggurat or pyramid, a man-made mountain, was a permanent ladder between the human ruler and the divine realm, a solid argument for his divine mandate. This symbolic language worked on 2 levels. For the elite, it reinforced their privileged place within this glorious cosmic order. For the common person fetching water or heading to the market, it provided a sense of living within a meaningful, stable universe governed by a power greater than themselves. It was a brilliant, silent reinforcement of the status, making the social hierarchy feel as natural and ordained as the sunrise. Yet these stories of eternal order, so confidently etched in stone, were not the final word. The very empires that built these perfect symbolic worlds would eventually face forces that their planners could not contain, forces that would test the resilience of their magnificent, meaning-laden designs to the breaking point. The symbolic stories carved into stone had to first be wrested from the earth itself. A ziggurat in Mesopotamia did not gleam with polished marble. It rose from the alluvial plain in a massive, tapering form of sun-dried, its core the very silt of the Tigris and Euphrates, coated in a protective skin of fired brick to withstand the rare but torrential rains. This was not a compromise. It was a profound adaptation, the first principle of a planner's true genius. Imperial blueprints were not one-size-fits-all decrees sent from a distant capital. They were living conversations with the local environment, a pragmatic dance between grand ambition and the materials underfoot. The planner had to become a student of the land. In the rainforests of the Maya, where limestone was abundant but metal tools were rare, architects developed the corbelled vault, stacking stones incrementally inward until they met at the peak, creating soaring temple roofs that mimicked the sacred mountains without the need for complex arches. Their white-plastered pyramids, etched with intricate glyphs, mirrored the nearby karst hills and captured the brilliant tropical light, while their reservoirs and canal systems were designed to capture and store precious rainwater through seasonal droughts. Conversely, in the ancient Chinese heartland, where vast forests stood but large-scale stone quarrying was less common, master builders perfected timber frame architecture for their palaces and administrative complexes. The Hall of Supreme Harmony in the Forbidden City, with its sweeping, upward-curving roof supported by intricate wooden brackets, represents the zenith of this adaptation, using a renewable resource to create structures of both immense strength and graceful flexibility, able to withstand earthquakes that would shatter rigid stone. This flexibility defines sustainability. Look to Mesa Verde, where the ancestral constructed entire villages within sheer cliff alcoves. They were not hiding. They were strategically using the massive sandstone overhangs as natural roofs and thermal regulators, shielding their homes from summer sun and winter snow while maximizing exposure to the low winter light for warmth. Their planning was a meticulous response to a high desert climate, positioning fields on the mesa tops and reservoirs to catch runoff. Even the seemingly miraculous floating city of Venice had a terrestrial precursor. Before the lagoon, the Roman town of was a canal-based settlement on the mainland, its layout already adapted to a wet landscape of rivers and marshes. When its inhabitants eventually moved to the islands, they brought not just a memory, but a fully formed logic of living with water, building on wooden piles driven into the soft silt. This pragmatic dialogue with nature often created a signature aesthetic, a regional fingerprint on imperial style. The Inca, masters of the Andes, did not simply cut stone. They practiced a form of geological conversation, fitting massive, irregular blocks together with such precision that the joints disappeared, a technique called ashlar masonry that allowed their structures to move with the frequent earthquakes rather than collapse. Their agricultural terraces carved into mountain slopes were not just farms. They were sophisticated instruments for microclimate control, soil retention, and hydraulic engineering, turning vertical landscapes into productive, stable extensions of the state. The successful empire understood this. Imposing a foreign material or an unsuitable layout was a recipe for collapse. True power was demonstrated not by forcing a single template onto every landscape, but by the intelligence to modify that template, to listen to the constraints of local stone, local timber, and local climate, and to turn those constraints into strengths. This respectful adaptation was the hallmark of a resilient system, but it raises a haunting question. What happened when the dialogue broke down? When the climate shifted, the rivers changed course, or the very resources that fueled this adaptation were stretched beyond their limits. The greatest test of any urban system was not its grandeur in times of plenty, but its fragility in the face of a changing world. Behind every perfect axis and aqueduct stood a mind that could see the future in a line of string. We rarely know their names. The master planners of the ancient world operated in the shadow of the kings and emperors who took credit for their work, yet their intellectual fingerprints are everywhere. Who were these individuals? They were rarely a single person, but more often a committee of expertise, a fusion of three vital roles: the priest astronomer, the military engineer, and the administrative scribe. Each brought a different kind of knowledge to the drafting table, and their collaboration turned abstract power into lived reality. The priest astronomer provided the sacred blueprint. He was the keeper of celestial calendars, the interpreter of omens, the one who could determine the auspicious day for breaking ground and the precise alignment that would please the gods. His tools were the stars, solstice markers, and sacred geometry. The military engineer brought brute force pragmatism. A veteran of campaigns, he knew how to move legions and siege engines, how to build a road that would not wash out, and how to design a wall that could withstand bombardment. His focus was logistics, durability, and control. Finally, the administrative scribe or bureaucrat managed the impossible scale. He commanded the ledgers that tracked thousands of laborers, the quotas of bricks and timber, the payrolls and rations. He translated the visionary plan into schedules, budgets, and work orders. This triad operated within a tight framework. Their autonomy from the ruler was likely limited to the technical execution of a grand vision that the king himself had approved, a vision meant to immortalize his reign. Yet within those constraints, they exercised immense creative and logistical power. We catch rare glimpses of named individuals who transcended their roles. In Egypt, Imhotep, the chancellor to Pharaoh, is credited as the architect of the step pyramid at Saqqara, the world's first major stone monument. He was later as a god of wisdom and medicine, a testament to the awe his engineering genius inspired. In Greece, of Miletus is hailed as the father of urban planning for his application of a rigid grid plan to the rebuilding of his home city and later to the port of Piraeus. He represented a more philosophical approach, arguing that city layout could directly foster good citizenship and social order. But for every Imhotep, there are countless anonymous masters. The engineer who calculated the gentle, consistent slope of a Roman aqueduct over 50 miles. The surveyor in the Indus Valley who ensured every brick met the sacred standard. The Mayan astronomer priest who aligned a temple doorway to capture the sun on the equinox. These planners drew from vast, interlocking knowledge systems, sacred texts, accumulated engineering lore, star charts passed down for generations, and hard-won experience from previous projects. They were the ultimate generalists in a world before specialization, required to think in both cosmic and granular terms. This human dimension is crucial. It reminds us that these perfect geometric cities were not inevitable. They were the products of intense debate, trial and error, and staggering ambition. And sometimes, that very ambition, the drive to build ever larger, ever more perfect symbols of power, could set in motion the forces that would eventually test the empire's foundations to their limit. A Roman legionary and a Tang dynasty official would have recognized two entirely different kinds of order. The soldier stationed in a frontier castrum lived within a perfect, reduced square, its two main streets crossing at the headquarters, every barrack block identical and interchangeable. The official, serving in N, navigated a vast, nested series of walled rectangles, moving from the outer city through administrative wards toward the innermost palace city, a progression of deepening exclusivity. These are not just different styles. They are distinct philosophical answers to the same eternal questions of how to organize people, project power, and create a functioning community. By placing these traditions side by side, we see a fascinating divergence in what order itself was meant to achieve. The Mediterranean model, perfected by Rome and inherited from the Greeks, often prioritized legibility and control for a diverse populace. The grid was its ultimate tool. It was rational, egalitarian from a bird's-eye view, and designed to be instantly understood by anyone, whether a citizen from Italy, a merchant from Syria, or a retired soldier from Gaul. Its core was the public civic space, the forum or agora, an open plaza meant for commerce, politics, and social mixing. This space celebrated public life, the visible performance of citizenship. The city's layout facilitated movement, military logistics, and the integration of conquered peoples into a single, comprehensible system. Order here was about clarity, efficiency, and the creation of a portable Roman or Hellenistic identity that could be stamped anywhere. In contrast, ancient Chinese planning, deeply influenced by cosmological principles like, emphasized harmonious enclosure and hierarchical alignment. The ideal city was a series of concentric squares, walls within walls, mirroring the Chinese belief in a square earth under a round heaven. N, the Tang capital, was a masterpiece of this philosophy. Its outermost walls formed a massive rectangle, oriented to the cardinal directions. Inside, separate walled enclosures housed the imperial palace, government offices, markets, and residential wards, each with gates locked at curfew. This was not about open public life, but about controlled administrative segmentation and the symbolic centrality of the emperor, the son of heaven, whose palace sat on the north-south central axis. Order here was about maintaining cosmic harmony and social hierarchy through meticulous spatial separation. We see this philosophical split elsewhere. The circular, radial plan of Abbasid Baghdad, with its rings of defenses and avenues converging on the caliph's central palace and mosque, spoke of a different kind of centrality, one of divine and imperial unity radiating outward. Compare this to the linear, processional focus of an Egyptian cult city like Thebes, which was less a unified urban plan and more a grand ceremonial corridor connecting massive temples along the Nile. Each complex a world unto itself focused on ritual and the afterlife, not daily civic interaction. Each tradition solved the problem of power differently, one through geometric integration, the other through symbolic enclosure, one through public space, the other through regulated compartments. These comparisons reveal there is no single blueprint for an imperial city, only a set of recurring challenges: security, administration, sustenance, and legitimacy. The Roman grid answered with military precision and integrative public space. The Chinese walled enclaves answered with cosmic symbolism and bureaucratic compartmentalization. One made the stranger feel oriented, the other made the subject feel placed within a grand, hierarchical scheme. Both were brilliantly effective systems, proving that the language of urban planning has many dialects, each shaped by deep cultural beliefs about the relationship between heaven, earth, and the individual. This rich variety of solutions shows us that our own modern cities are built upon layers of these ancient choices, conscious or not, about what a community should be. Those philosophical blueprints did not vanish with the marble. They went underground, becoming a kind of ghost in the stone, whispering their logic through the centuries. Long after the Roman legions from a province like Gaul, the people who remained did not forget the straight roads and the orderly grid. They built their new towns directly on top of them, but the logic shifted. The rigid cardo and the main north-south and east-west streets of a Roman town often survived not as grand thoroughfares, but as the buried foundations for the winding, organic lanes of a medieval market town. You can see this ghost in the street map of modern Florence, where the Roman grid still faintly structures the dense medieval center around the Piazza della. The imperial template of control had dissolved, but the physical imprint remained, a palimpsest upon which a new, more localized order was written. This adaptation is the true legacy of early systems. The principles did not die, they evolved, finding new life in the urban experiments of later eras, often in surprising forms. Consider the fortified bastides of southwestern France, built in the 13th and 14th centuries. These were new towns, planted by French or English kings to secure a contested frontier. Their plans are strikingly familiar: a neat grid of streets centered on a market square, often with a central church or hall. This was not a coincidence. It was the deliberate revival of the Roman colonial model, the grid as a tool for rapid settlement, defense, and economic control in a lawless region. The king provided the land, the charter, and the plan, offering freedoms to settlers who would come and hold the territory. It was imperial planning on a smaller feudal scale, proving the template's utility for pacification and colonization remained potent 1,000 years after Rome's fall. Across the Mediterranean, a different inheritance took root. The Islamic, or city, absorbed and transformed ancient Persian and Roman ideas into something new. While many older Islamic cities grew organically around a core mosque and market, later planned foundations reveal a clear intellectual debt. The Persian concept of a formal garden divided into 4 quadrants by water channels was not merely an aesthetic ideal. It was a geometric diagram of paradise, a representation of the 4 rivers of Eden. This symbolic geometry leaped from the garden into the city itself. When the Emperor Shah built the walled city of Delhi in the 17th century, its central artery, the Chowk, was designed as a grand processional way leading to the Red Fort, with canals running down its center. The entire city layout, with its emphasis on water and symbolic order, directly channeled this ancient Persian ideal, now fused with Islamic and Indian architectural traditions to project a new imperial vision. The garden had become a city. Perhaps the most literal homage to ancient planning emerged during the Renaissance, a period obsessed with recovering classical knowledge. Architects and military engineers, studying the ruins of Rome and the texts of Vitruvius, became convinced that the ideal city could be designed from first principles, combining beauty, defense, and social harmony. The result was the Star Fort City, of which in Italy is the quintessential example. Founded in 1593, is a perfect 9-pointed star when seen from above, its geometric form dictated entirely by the new science of ballistics and siege warfare. Yet within that radical star-shaped perimeter, the street plan is a perfect radial grid, with 6 main avenues and 9 concentric rings emanating from a central hexagonal piazza. This was grid, reimagined through the lens of gunpowder. The central piazza held the cathedral and government buildings, echoing the Forum Basilica complex, while the radial streets allowed for the rapid movement of troops to any point on the defensive walls. Here, Roman order, Greek geometry, and medieval fortification fused into a single, breathtakingly rational plan. It was a testament to the enduring belief that human society, if properly arranged in space, could achieve perfection. This continuity across reveals a profound truth. The core challenges of urban life, security, community, commerce, and symbolic expression are perennial. The early empires developed a powerful toolkit of spatial solutions to meet them: the grid, the axis, the fortified wall, the zone district, the monumental core. When their political structures crumbled, the toolkit survived. It was passed down, not in intact manuals, but in the lived experience of ruins, in the persistent logic of a straight line on a map, and in the enduring human desire to shape a meaningful environment. Medieval lords, Islamic caliphs, and Renaissance princes all reached for these ancient blueprints, adapting them to their own technologies, beliefs, and scales of power. They prove that these early codes were not static commandments, but a resilient language of space, one that could be translated again and again to build new worlds upon the foundations of the old. This language, however, would face its greatest test not from a change in rulers, but from a revolution in scale and speed that the ancient planners could never have envisioned. The straight lines of a Roman road are easy to see, but the true contours of an ancient city are often hidden, buried under centuries of soil and forest. For generations, archaeologists relied on the slow, patient work of trowels and brushes, piecing together urban plans one fragment at a time. Today, a technological revolution is allowing us to see these lost cities whole, to decode their grand designs without ever breaking the ground. It begins with the simple but profound shift from excavation to remote sensing. Imagine trying to understand the blueprint of a house by only looking at a single, scattered handful of its bricks. That was the old challenge. Now, tools like LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, act like a magical sieve. Mounted on aircraft, it fires millions of laser pulses toward the ground. Most bounce back from the top of the jungle canopy, but a precious few slip through gaps in the leaves, hit the ground, and return. By stripping away the digital forest, researchers are left with a breathtakingly precise three-dimensional map of the actual Earth beneath. In Guatemala, this technology didn't just find a few new Mayan structures. It revealed a vast, interconnected network of cities, farms, fortifications, and raised causeways, showing a civilization of staggering complexity and population density that completely rewrote the textbooks. The jungle had kept its secret for 1,000 years, but light, measured in pulses, finally told the story. This non-invasive sight extends deep into the Earth itself with ground-penetrating radar. Think of it as a form of sonar for solid ground. A device is dragged across a field, sending radio waves downward. When those waves hit a buried wall, a compacted floor, or even an empty tomb, they bounce back with a different signature. The result is not a photograph, but a vertical slice of the subsurface that shows anomalies and patterns invisible to the human eye. In Italy, this technique has mapped entire neighborhoods of the lost Roman city revealing a detailed plan of its temple, market, and even its intricate water pipe system, all while the site above remained an undisturbed sheep pasture. It allows archaeologists to ask precise questions, to target their excavations with surgical accuracy, moving from random digging to informed investigation. From the ground, we then pull back to a celestial vantage point. Satellite imagery and aerial photography have evolved far beyond simple pictures. Multispectral and sensors can detect subtle differences in vegetation health or soil moisture that are imperceptible to us. A stone wall buried just beneath a field will stress the crops growing above it, causing them to grow shorter and ripen earlier. From space, this creates a pattern, a faint ghost of a building or a road, visible only in the near-infrared spectrum. These crop marks, along with soil marks and shadow marks, have revealed the outlines of ancient farms, ceremonial circles, and fortifications across the world. They showed researchers that the famous stone circle at Stonehenge was part of a much larger, sprawling ritual landscape. They helped trace the gargantuan suburban sprawl around Angkor Wat, proving it was the heart of a low-density urban complex that may have been home to 750,000 people, making it one of the largest pre-industrial cities on Earth. All of this data, the LiDAR point clouds, the radar slices, the spectral images, then flows into the digital realm for synthesis. Three-dimensional modeling software allows experts to reconstruct these cities not as static maps, but as dynamic spaces. They can test from a temple platform, simulate the flow of water through aqueducts, or calculate how sunlight would have fallen on a palace courtyard during a solstice. This process turns abstract plans into lived experiences. It solved the mystery of the Great Pyramid's construction ramps by digitally modeling the most efficient paths for moving massive blocks. It is helping to virtually reconstruct the layout of the great maritime harbor of ancient Rome, now largely submerged under silt and water, by combining sonar maps of with old excavation records. This modern decoding is a continuous loop of discovery. Each new technological pass refines the model, which in turn prompts new questions, sending researchers back to the data or to a very targeted, delicate excavation for confirmation. The ancient planner's integrated vision is finally being met with an integrated mode of seeing, allowing us to understand these places not as collections of ruins, but as the sophisticated, functioning systems they truly were. But those digital reconstructions, for all their precision, can sometimes create an illusion of their own. We risk seeing these ancient cities as either flawless utopias of forgotten genius or as grim monuments built solely by oppression. The truth, as always, is far more textured and human. A common misconception paints early planned cities as perfect blueprints sprung fully formed from a ruler's mind onto a blank landscape. In reality, many of the greatest imperial capitals began as organic settlements. Rome itself famously grew from scattered villages on 7 hills, its legendary sewers and forums built over generations of haphazard growth before later emperors imposed a more systematic order. Even the meticulously gridded city of Mohenjo-Daro shows signs of multiple construction phases and modifications, its perfect streets the result of iterative refinement, not a single divine decree. The presence of advanced planning does not imply a perfectly harmonious society, either. The same civilization that engineered celestial axis or the Indus Valley's sanitation likely grappled with social inequalities, internal conflicts, and the immense human cost of their ambitions. Another persistent romantic notion is that of lost technologies, secret knowledge so advanced it defies our understanding. This idea often overlooks the cumulative, practical nature of engineering. The Romans did not possess a magical concrete recipe forgotten to time. They perfected a mix using locally available volcanic ash through centuries of trial and error. The precision of Inca stonework seems miraculous until you understand the patient process of grinding stone against stone with sand and water, a technique born from necessity in an area without iron tools. These were not precocious secrets, but brilliant adaptations to specific environmental and material constraints. The labor behind these wonders is another area of frequent oversimplification. While the use of coerced labor and captive populations was undoubtedly a feature of many empires, archaeological evidence also points to complex systems of seasonal labor, where citizens fulfilled a duty to the state, often during agricultural off-seasons, and sometimes even skilled, paid artisans for specialized tasks. Reducing these monumental achievements to mere slave-built projects strips them of their organizational sophistication and the diverse human experiences involved. Separating the romantic speculation from the archaeological evidence is not about diminishing these accomplishments. It is about honoring them more fully, by seeing these cities not as alien or perfect, but as profoundly human endeavors. We can appreciate the genuine brilliance within their context. They were solutions to real problems of water, food, defense, and social cohesion, solutions that were sometimes astonishingly successful and sometimes deeply flawed. This clearer view allows us to ask the most important question of all: what were the limits of even the most brilliant plan? When did the dialogue between ambition and environment finally break down? The silent mounds of Cahokia hold a sobering lesson in the limits of human design. Across the Americas and beyond, we find the haunting remains of cities where the grandest plans ultimately met their breaking point. This is not a story of mysterious vanishings, but of complex systems pushed beyond their capacity to adapt. Even the most brilliant urban blueprint existed within a delicate web of environmental and social constraints, and when those threads frayed, the entire tapestry could unravel with startling speed. One of the most common failure points was the very environment these cities sought to master. The Maya of the Classic period, for instance, were brilliant hydrologists, building reservoirs and canals to survive seasonal droughts. Yet evidence suggests that in some city-states, prolonged periods of intense drought, possibly exacerbated by local deforestation for agriculture and plaster production, overwhelmed these carefully engineered systems. When the rains failed for years, the reservoirs could not be refilled, leading to crop failure, social unrest, and the gradual abandonment of urban cores. The city's success had, in a tragic twist, made it more vulnerable to the climate's fluctuations. Similarly, in ancient Mesopotamia, the irrigation that made the desert bloom carried a hidden cost. Without adequate drainage, water evaporated in the fierce sun, leaving behind salts that gradually poisoned the soil. Over centuries, this rising salinity led to declining wheat and barley yields, weakening the agricultural base that supported massive urban populations like Ur and Uruk. The engineering solution created a slow-moving environmental crisis that no administrative decree could easily reverse. Another critical vulnerability was the system's dependence on a centralized authority. The planned city was a high-maintenance organism. Aqueducts needed constant cleaning and repair. Roads required upkeep. Granaries demanded meticulous management. This all relied on a stable, capable, and resource-rich administration to coordinate labor and enforce standards. When that central authority weakened due to external invasion, internal succession crises, or economic collapse, the maintenance of the urban machine often faltered first. A broken aqueduct could leave a district without water for months. Unmaintained sewers could become public health hazards. The very complexity that made the city efficient became a liability when the organizing intelligence at its center faded. Furthermore, success could sow the seeds of strain. A thriving, well-planned city attracted more people, leading to overpopulation that its original infrastructure was not designed to handle. Residential compounds meant for a few families might be subdivided again and again. Green spaces and gardens within city walls might be paved over for new housing. This increased density could stress water supplies, sanitation systems, and food distribution networks, leading to hardship, disease, and social friction. The planned order could buckle under the pressure of its own demographic success. Finally, there was the challenge of sheer administrative overreach. As empires grew, the bureaucratic systems needed to manage distant provinces, collect taxes, and coordinate large-scale projects became staggeringly complex. Corruption, inefficiency, and communication delays could creep in. The elegant logic of the original city plan, conceived for a smaller or more manageable scale, might not translate effectively to a sprawling, diverse empire. The system could collapse under the weight of its own administrative complexity, leaving grand urban centers isolated and unable to function as the vital nodes they were meant to be. Understanding these limits is not about assigning blame, but about recognizing a fundamental truth. The early planners were not gods. They were problem solvers working within a dynamic and often unforgiving world. Their legacies teach us that no urban system, no matter how ingeniously designed, is permanent or independent. It exists in a continuous conversation with its environment, its resources, and the social contract that maintains it. The ruins remind us that sustainability is not a one-time achievement, but a perpetual, careful negotiation. The blueprint on parchment was silent about the hands that would lift the stones. Behind every celestial alignment and every soaring wall lies a more difficult question of human cost, a dimension of urban planning that is written not in geometry, but in the quiet records of toil. To truly decode these systems, we must look past the grand design and into the conditions of its creation, confronting the complex and often difficult relationship between imperial vision and the labor that made it real. This is not about diminishing the technical achievement, but about understanding its full foundation. The scale of these projects was so vast that it required mobilizing populations on a scale we can scarcely comprehend. Different societies employed different systems, but coercion was a common thread woven through many of them. The system, a form of labor tax, was widespread. In ancient Egypt, during the Nile's annual flood when farming was impossible, peasants were conscripted by the state to work on royal projects like pyramids or temples. This was often framed as a civic or religious duty, a way to serve the god-king and ensure cosmic order. While it was seasonal and sometimes provided rations, it was compulsory, drawing people from their homes for months of arduous work. In other contexts, the labor source was more explicitly captured. The massive defensive walls and royal palaces of the Assyrian Empire, for instance, were built in part by populations forcibly relocated from conquered territories, a practice meant to both weaken rebellious regions and supply the imperial center with a disposable workforce. The human cost of such endeavors is hinted at in records and archaeology. While we must avoid graphic speculation, researchers note that the logistical challenges alone, providing food, water, and shelter for tens of thousands of conscripted workers in remote locations, would have led to significant hardship. The resting places associated with some major construction sites sometimes show evidence of injuries consistent with heavy labor and limited medical care, offering a silent testament to the physical toll. This reality coexisted with the work of highly skilled and likely better compensated artisans. The intricate carvings on a Babylonian gate, the precise masonry of an Inca wall, the brilliant glazes of a Persian frieze, these were the products of lifetime specialists, masters of their craft who may have enjoyed higher status. The urban plan, therefore, was built by a hierarchy of labor that mirrored the social hierarchy it was designed to enforce. The vast majority moved earth and stone under command, while a privileged few applied the finishing touches of genius. This duality forces a crucial reflection. Whose vision of the city was ultimately being built? The answer is almost universally that of a tiny elite, the ruler, the priestly class, the imperial administration. The city plan served their needs for security, legitimation, control, and glorification. The common laborer who spent years quarrying limestone for a pharaoh's tomb likely never enjoyed the benefits of the city's grand processional ways or its purified temple precincts. Their experience of the plan was one of obligation, not civic pride. This ethical dimension directly shapes how we interpret these sites today. When we stand in awe before the Great Wall, we are witnessing not just a military marvel, but a monument to immense collective effort, much of it unwilling. This does not mean we cannot admire the engineering, but it asks us to hold a more complete picture, to see the grandeur and the gravity together. It reminds us that the most enduring legacies of human civilization are often layered with profound complexity, born from both soaring inspiration and the hard realities of power. Recognizing this invisible foundation is the final essential step in decoding the urban plan, for it completes the story of how abstract ideas become concrete reality, and at whose expense. That ethical dimension is not a relic. It lives on in the very streets we walk today. The debates that shaped ancient empires, the tension between rigid order and organic life, between monumental display and human scale, are the same debates that define our modern cities. In the 1960s, the activist and writer Jane Jacobs famously stood against the sweeping urban renewal projects of her time, projects that sought to replace vibrant, messy neighborhoods with sterile towers and vast empty plazas. Her powerful critique was not just about aesthetics. It was a defense of the complex, self-organizing systems she saw in places like her own Greenwich Village, the eyes on the street that created safety, the mixed-use blocks where homes sat above shops, the short blocks that encouraged walking and chance encounters. In fighting the modernist, Jacobs was, in a profound sense, arguing against a new kind of imperial grid, a top-down plan that valued automotive efficiency and abstract geometric purity over the lived experience of the community. She was championing the kind of organic vitality that existed in cities long before the first master planner drew a straight line, the very vitality that some ancient rigid grids may have inadvertently stifled. This conversation between past and present is more than theoretical. Look at the contemporary concept of the 15-minute city, the idea that all essential needs, work, food, education, leisure, should be accessible within a 15-minute walk or bike ride from one's home. This is not a futuristic innovation. It is a powerful echo of the self-contained wards of ancient capitals. In Tang Dynasty N, residents lived in walled neighborhoods that contained temples, schools, and local markets. In the of, each ward was a functioning unit with its own crafts and community governance. These were not 15-minute cities by design, but they were walkable, mixed-use districts born from necessity and a logic of localized efficiency. Modern planners now look back at these models not to copy them, but to understand the principles of proximity and community resilience they embodied. They study the failures, too. The traffic congestion implied by ruts in Roman streets informs studies on urban throughput. The collapse of Mayan reservoirs under prolonged drought serves as a stark case study in climate resilience for cities facing their own water crises today. By decoding these ancient systems, we gain a richer vocabulary and a much longer timeline for our current urban challenges. When a planner advocates for mixed-use zoning to revive a downtown, they are engaging in a dialogue that began when the first potter set up a workshop next to their home in Mohenjo-Daro. When an engineer designs a sponge city to absorb stormwater like the Khmer canals, they are applying a lesson written in the landscape of Angkor 1,000 years ago. The quest for meaningful civic space, a place for people to gather and feel part of something larger, connects the Roman Forum to the modern pedestrian plaza. Historians, archaeologists, and urban theorists now collaborate, reading the archaeological record not just as a history of kings, but as a vast, open-source database of urban experiments. Each ancient city represents a centuries-long test of a particular hypothesis about how people can live together. This perspective transforms our view of the modern metropolis. We are not building on a blank slate, but adding a new chapter to a continuous human conversation about power, community, and place. The skyscraper is our ziggurat, the subway our Roman road, the park our sacred grove. The choices we make about zoning, transit, and public space are part of this old legacy. They are answers to the same enduring questions, just reframed with new materials and new scales of population. So the next time you navigate your own city, notice its patterns. Is it designed for the car or the pedestrian? Does it have a single, overpowering center or many vibrant nodes? Does it feel alive with chance encounters or sterile in its efficiency? In asking these questions, you are participating in the most ancient of arts. You are reading the urban plan, and in doing so, you are decoding the story of your own civilization, written not in words, but in the space between buildings and the flow of life on the street. The perfect geometry of Mohenjo-Daro offers no translation. We can walk its wide, gridded streets, admire its advanced drainage, and handle its standardized bricks, but the people who built it remain silent. Their script, found on seals and pottery, consists of over 400 distinct symbols, yet it stubbornly resists decipherment. This is one of the great, haunting paradoxes in the study of early planning, a society sophisticated enough to engineer an entire city, but whose language and thoughts are locked away from us. We see the system in exquisite detail, but we cannot hear the conversation that governed it. Were these glyphs a true writing system recording laws and trade, or were they a more limited set of religious or administrative symbols? Without a stone, the voice of the Indus Valley civilization is a profound, echoing silence, reminding us that a plan can be perfectly clear while its purpose remains deeply obscure. Equally enigmatic are the vast etched into the Peruvian desert, the lines. From the ground, they are shallow scratches in the reddish pebbles. From the air, they resolve into staggering images of hummingbirds, spiders, monkeys, and perfect geometric shapes stretching for miles. Their connection to urban planning is indirect but compelling. They are not a city, but they are a monumental landscape-scale project that required coordinated labor, precise measurement, and a shared cultural vision, the same foundational skills needed to build a planned settlement. But to what end? The prevailing theory suggests they were ceremonial pathways, walked during rituals related to water and fertility in an arid land. Some researchers propose they were a kind of celestial calendar, their alignments marking solstices or the risings of important stars. Yet the question lingers, why create art so immense it can only be fully appreciated from a vantage point humans could not physically reach? The lines challenge our very definition of a planned space, suggesting that for some cultures, the most important designs were not for dwelling, but for connecting with forces beyond the human scale, turning the entire territory into a sacred map. On the island of Crete, the labyrinthine palace of Knossos presents a different kind of puzzle. Its complex layout of storerooms, courtyards, ceremonial chambers, and living quarters seems to lack the rigid axial order of later imperial capitals. Was this a planned city palace, or did it grow organically around a central court over centuries? The Minoans left no records of a central planning authority, yet the palace's sophisticated plumbing, light wells, and intricate frescoes suggest a high degree of coordinated design. The mystery deepens with the absence of obvious fortifications. Unlike the heavily walled cities of Mesopotamia or the bastides of medieval Europe, Knossos appears open, undefended. Does this indicate a peaceful society confident in its naval power, or a planning philosophy where cultural and economic control superseded military deterrence? The ruins whisper of a different logic, one where centrality was expressed through complexity and artistic flourish rather than geometric imposition or defensive walls, a system we can reconstruct but may never fully intuit. These enduring puzzles are not failures of archaeology. They are its engine. Every new discovery, whether from LiDAR scans revealing lost Maya cities or ground-penetrating radar mapping a buried Roman villa, has the power to overturn decades of settled theory. The Decoding is an unfinished project, a conversation with the past that is constantly being revised. This is the thrilling, humbling reality of the field. We piece together patterns from stone and pottery, but some aspects of ancient logic, their motivations, their spiritual convictions, the daily feel of life in their streets, may remain forever just beyond our grasp. That opacity is itself a lesson. It cautions us against the arrogance of believing we can ever fully know another civilization's mind. Instead, these mysteries invite us to keep looking, to keep questioning. They remind us that the most fascinating chapters in the story of human settlement are often the ones written in a language we are still learning to read, urging us to wonder what profound truths about community and power might still lie buried, waiting for the right key to turn. That silence in the stones is an invitation to listen. You do not need a degree in archaeology to begin decoding the language of ancient cities. With a few simple questions, you can transform a confusing jumble of foundations in a museum diorama or a satellite image into a legible text, a story waiting to be read. Think of it as a basic decoder's toolkit for your own curiosity. First, find the spine of the city. Look for the central axis, that dominant line everything else seems to orbit. Is it a grand avenue like the Street of the Dead or a ceremonial pathway leading straight to a temple complex? This axis is the city's primary statement, telling you what the planners considered most sacred or powerful, the direction they wanted all eyes and movement to follow. Next, trace the boundaries. Can you identify the line of the walls or the placement of the main gates? Walls define the universe of the city, marking the literal edge of its order. The number and grandeur of the gates often speak to the city's confidence and its connections. A city with few, heavily fortified gates, like many Assyrian citadels, was prioritizing defense and controlled access. A city with multiple open gates along trade routes, like Imperial Rome, was broadcasting its role as a commercial hub, inviting the world in. Then follow the water. This is often the most revealing trail. Where did it come from? Locate the source, whether it is a riverbank, the terminus of an aqueduct, or the site of public wells. Then trace its path. Does it flow openly through canals, or is it channeled beneath the streets in covered drains? The management of water reveals a civilization's technical priorities and its social values, showing whether this vital resource was a public utility or a controlled privilege. Now map the movement. Identify the major thoroughfares. Are they a rigid, right-angled grid or a series of spokes radiating from a center? A grid suggests a desire for administrative control and efficient division, while radial plans often point to a powerful symbolic core, like the Caliph's palace in Baghdad. Notice the width. Wide, straight avenues were for processions and armies, narrow, winding lanes were for daily residential life. This contrast alone tells you who the city was really built for. Finally, observe the social geography. Compare the location and scale of the monumental core, the temples, palaces, and administrative blocks with the residential areas. Are they integrated or strictly separated? Is the palace on a high citadel, literally looking down on the common homes, or is it woven into the urban fabric? This relationship is a direct map of the social hierarchy, showing you the distance, both physical and symbolic, between the rulers and the ruled. And always consider the ground itself. Why was the city placed precisely here? Look at the topography. Is it on a high plateau for defense, like on a river bend for trade and transport, like London or Paris? Or was the location chosen for celestial alignment or a sacred spring, making symbolism more important than practical convenience? By asking these structured questions, you shift from passive observer to active interpreter. A scattered array of stone blocks becomes a planned residential ward. A lone, massive foundation becomes part of a defensive curtain. You start to see the dialogue between the planner's grand vision and the stubborn realities of the landscape. This practice does more than illuminate the past. It changes how you see the present. The logic of a one-way street, the zoning of a downtown district, the placement of a city park, all are chapters in the same ongoing story of how we choose to build our world. The ancient planners may be gone, but their language of space is still being spoken all around us, waiting for anyone who learns how to listen. The silence of those ancient streets is no longer a barrier. Your journey as a decoder does not have to end here. For the newly intrigued, a world of deeper discovery awaits, a curated path through books, screens, and stone that can turn curiosity into genuine understanding. A foundational place to begin is with the very thinkers who first asked these questions. Lewis' classic work, The City in History, remains a profound and sweeping exploration of the urban form, tracing the soul of the city from its earliest origins. For a more focused archaeological lens, Charles Gates's Ancient Cities offers a clear and authoritative survey of urban development across the Mediterranean and Near East, connecting physical ruins to the societies that built them. These are not dry textbooks, but narratives that bring the logic of ancient planners vividly to life. To see these principles in motion, turn to the visual storytelling of documentary films. Series like the BBC's Ancient Worlds or PBS's Secrets of the Dead combine stunning location footage with cutting-edge research, allowing you to walk virtually through a digitally resurrected Roman market or pier inside a Maya reservoir. The digital age has also gifted us with incredible channels right here on YouTube, where archaeologists and historians share findings in real time. Channels like World of Antiquity or the lecture series from the Archaeological Institute of America offer deep dives into specific sites and discoveries, bringing the academic conversation directly to you. Of course, nothing compares to standing on the ground where history was made. Consider a pilgrimage, whether physical or virtual, to the UNESCO World Heritage Sites that are open-air textbooks of urban planning. Walk the fossilized streets of Pompeii, where the Roman grid and daily life were preserved in a single, poignant moment. Feel the awe of approaching Petra through its narrow, controlling approach and revealing monumental grandeur. Marvel at the dry stone walls of Great Zimbabwe, a testament to sophisticated statecraft in southern Africa, or contemplate the vast, ordered layout of ancient N, the starting point of the Silk Road. Each site is a chapter in the global story of how humans have built community. If travel is not possible, technology now offers remarkable portals. Institutions like the British Museum host vast online collections where you can zoom in on artifacts from Mohenjo-Daro or Mesopotamian cylinder seals. Digital reconstruction projects, such as those for ancient Rome or the Giza Plateau, allow you to explore these places in 3 dimensions, testing and understanding scale in ways a flat map never could. This is your invitation to move from passive viewing to active exploration. Pick one book, watch one documentary, or digitally wander one ancient city. Let the questions guide you. Why is this street curved? Why is that temple so tall? In seeking your own answers, you join a conversation thousands of years in the making, becoming not just a learner of history, but a decoder of the human story itself. The journey from Mohenjo-Daro's quiet drains to Rome's echoing forums reveals a profound truth. These were not just places to live. They were arguments made permanent, deliberate attempts to write a civilization's deepest values directly into the landscape. We have seen how geometry could be a sacred language, aligning streets with stars to weave human life into cosmic order. We have traced the veins of aqueducts and canals, the life-giving systems that turned arid plains into imperial heartlands. We have walked the rigid grids and hierarchical wards that organize society itself, making status visible and movement controllable. And we have stood before monumental cores, those theaters of stone designed to overwhelm the senses and cement loyalty. Each system, from the replicable Roman template to the symbolic enclosures of ancient China, was a sophisticated answer to the eternal challenges of security, sustenance, and legitimacy. The planners of these empires understood that to shape space is to shape behavior, to channel belief, and to project power across generations. Their work was a fusion of celestial observation, military pragmatism, and administrative genius, a testament to humanity's drive to build not just shelters, but meaning. Yet these stories are not merely about control. They are also about adaptation, about listening to the constraints of local stone and climate, and about the remarkable resilience of ideas. The Roman grid found new life in medieval bastides. The Persian paradise garden blossomed into city plans. The ancient dialogue between order and organic life still echoes in our modern debates over zoning and community design. As we look to our own urban futures, grappling with climate resilience, social equity, and technological change, these ancient blueprints offer a deep well of insight. They teach us about the long-term consequences of our material choices, the social impact of our layouts, and the profound responsibility of designing the world we share. The silent stones of these early cities continue to speak, if we know how to listen. They ask us to consider what stories our own avenues, parks, and skylines will tell. What patterns of community, power, and adaptation will future civilizations decode from the cities we are building today? We would love to hear your reflections on this. What ancient urban principle do you find most relevant to our modern world? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into the architecture of empire, subscribe to join us as we continue unraveling history's greatest mysteries.